Okay. So I'm going to put this picture straight onto WeChat, straight onto the internet.
那我们跟 Kevin 挥挥手，好吧？
And we will run some facial recognition software and determine who is paying attention and who is sleeping. Thank you. Excellent. Thank you. Fantastic. That's actually going on to Twitter, with apologies to Tencent, because my Chinese is not good enough to sign up for WeChat. So our topic this morning is the Internet of Things. Specifically, what does the Internet of Things mean for you, for me, for individuals? And what I just did would have seemed miraculous 10 years ago, maybe less than 10 years ago. I took a very small device out of my pocket. I took a high-definition panoramic photograph of everybody in the room here in Beijing. It is now available to thousands and thousands of people all around the world. There are people all around the world looking at your face right now. And we take that very much for granted now. As I say, had I done it 10 years ago, everybody would have been amazed. So just keep that in mind as we talk about the future, because the fundamental thing about the future is that it is actually very easy to predict and very hard to believe. And one of the reasons it's hard to believe is, as human beings, we adjust very quickly to change. Which is why I can take my phone out of my pocket and take your photograph, and we're not really very surprised by that, even though not that long ago we would have been. We live in a connected world, but that's not new. There's nothing new about the connected world. The connected world is actually tens of thousands of years old. So what we see in this picture here, way over here, this is an aerial view of trucks with oranges on them in Florida. This is not quite the beginning of the orange supply chain, but it's close to it. If you happen to have a glass of orange juice with your breakfast this morning, for example, you were at the very end of a supply chain that started somewhere here. And obviously, those trucks move on roads and freeways. They reach ports where oranges are loaded onto shipping containers, and then all the way over here, those shipping containers go on to container ships and travel around the world. And then some other things happen, and wherever you are in the world, you can have a glass of orange juice with your breakfast. That is the world we live in, and frankly, with a few changes every so often, that's the world we've lived in for a very long time. So here are some examples of our connected world that are not to do with the internet. This is airplanes flying around the world. These are international air routes. And what travels on airplanes is not really information or data. It's things. It's physical things. It's people, it's packages, it's luggage. I just mentioned container ships. This is the same kind of map, but instead of airplanes, these are shipping routes. These are those container ships. The sea is full of things, not just oranges, but all kinds of things moving around. Raw materials, finished products, scrap, traveling all the time. And in fact, you can look at a map from the 1800s of shipping routes, and they're about the same. This is another example of things moving around the world. What this map shows is energy. Now keep in mind, energy is physical. This is mainly oil and natural gas, again, traveling on ships or through pipelines. These are not bits, these are not ones and zeros. They're molecules, atoms, things. So these are the kind of things that I talk about when I say Internet of Things. And we are physical beings. We may live in a kind of an information age, but we are physical beings. And all the things traveling around on these maps are things we depend on for our survival. You cannot eat ones and zeros. Ones and zeros will not keep you warm. If we turned off the internet today, it would be very inconvenient, but we would not die. If we turned off the global supply chain today, the world would collapse probably in about 48 hours. So we get very enamored with the information of the information age, but the foundation of the information age is things. And just one last map for completeness. This, by the way, is sort of the map of the internet, the map of data flows moving from country to country. And what the Internet of Things is doing, not will do, is doing, as I will show you, is integrating this, our most recent network, the network of information, digital information, the internet, with all those other much older and frankly even more important networks, which are those networks of things. Now, I mention all that because when we talk about things in the information age, we can get a little bit confused. A lot of people, when they think about things, for some reason, think about things that you can plug into the wall. Electric, electronic things. Rice cookers, toasters, refrigerators. And the other thing they think about is apps on your smartphone. And that leads us to some very ridiculous places. For example, these are real. I did not make these up when drunk. The smart wine bottle probably tells you when you've had too much. This is real. The smart bikini tells you when you have sunburn. If it hurts, you have sunburn. You don't need a smart bikini. The smart water bottle tells you if you've drunk enough water. You probably know that by the fact that you're thirsty, but that exists. And then way over here, brand new, the smart shaver. I'm not actually sure what that tells you. This, and there are hundreds of examples, this is not the Internet of Things. So when you think about the Internet of Things, don't think about, well, somebody put a chip in a wine bottle or a bikini, and it talks to an app, and that's what the Internet of Things is. This stuff is it's frivolous, it's trivial, not very useful, not very interesting. The refrigerator that talks to the rice cooker is not the Internet of Things. So what is the Internet of Things? Well, one of the best definitions of the Internet of Things I have ever heard, and I've heard very many, is this one. Wan Jibao, the last premier of China. And this is what he said during a speech. He said, as I understand it, the Internet of Things is the wisdom of the earth. So you think about all those maps I just showed you of the shipping containers and the energy moving around and the people moving around on airplanes, and then you integrate that with the Internet, and this is exactly what you have. The wisdom of the earth. To the best of my knowledge, by the way, the first head of state ever to use the words Internet of Things in public. And that's significant, and we'll come back to why in a moment. But just to expand on that a little bit, all the information in our computer systems in the 20th century was entered by human beings. It was typed in through keyboards. Someone took a film with a camera, maybe they scanned a barcode. But if you think about the world has countless billions of megabytes of data. All this information is there waiting to be captured. And human beings can't capture hardly any of it. But if we automate using sensors, which is what the Internet of Things does, the capturing of information about the world, we kind of end up with a whole bunch of data that we don't have otherwise. So you build temperature sensors into the orange supply chain, and you start to gather information about what's going on in the world that you couldn't get any other way. And then all that data goes on to the Internet, where we have very smart algorithms that analyze it. And that can lead to some decision. Either a person sees something, and we need more oranges, we need fewer oranges, or a machine sees something and makes a change, picks some more oranges, for example. And that decision leads to a change in the world, which takes us all the way back to the beginning, and we gather more data, and we make another decision, and we keep going forever and ever. And that's the wisdom of the earth. That's the Internet of Things. And it's already happening. Is this really a phone? Or is phone calls one of the many apps on this device? If you think about how much time you spend using your, let's call it a phone, because that's its name, your phone, how much of that is on phone calls? Not very much. So what is this device in my pocket? Well, it's not really just a small computer. It's actually a sensor platform. It is a device that is capable of gathering information automatically. And one of the easiest examples to talk about is camera technology. Digital cameras have gone from nothing in about 2000 to about 1 billion units a year in 2013, probably more like 2 or 3 billion units a year today. A camera is a sensor. And it's not just for taking pictures that other people can look at. What we see now is a growing suite of algorithms that turn that data into decisions, like who is in this photograph. What is in this photograph? How old is this person? Is this a man or a woman? So that camera on your phone is actually a piece of Internet of Things technology. It's a network-enabled sensor that can talk to algorithms. And the interesting thing is, it's not the only sensor in your phone. Your phone also knows where it is. Even when you don't know where you are, your phone knows where you are. And that's because of GPS, which is another networked sensor technology. A lot of people don't think about GPS as a sensor. They might not think about their camera as a sensor, but they are, and they're networked, and they're part of the Internet of Things. And like digital cameras, GPS has gone from barely anything a few years ago to billions of units shipped today. And of course, you can combine the two, and then you have a photograph and you know where it was taken, like the photograph that I just took of everybody here. Now, some people, when I explain this, say, well, yes, but all you've really said is smartphones are popular. Cameras are in smartphones, GPS is in smartphones. And that's somewhat true. And it's interesting to note that the typical smartphone today contains about 10 different sensors. Camera, microphone, GPS, those are the obvious ones. But there's also fingerprint, motion, atmospheric pressure, temperature. Some of them measure heartbeat, and so on. So in a way, your smartphone has more sensors than you do. And the number of sensors being added is growing every year. That is different to your laptop, which doesn't even have GPS. So this thing we call a phone is actually a sensor platform that's networked. It's part of the Internet of Things. But even if we set that aside, what about some other technology that is Internet of Things related that's not smartphone? The classic example is a technology called RFID, radio frequency identification. Tiny little chips used for identifying things. You find them in hotel room keys or passes to get you through the toll road, for example. Well, this is how many billions of smartphones we're selling every year. How does RFID compare? For the last few years, we have sold about 1 billion more RFID tags a year than smartphones. So if you think smartphones are everywhere, RFID tags are even more everywhere. They're just so small you can't see them. So the Internet of Things is very much here now. Now, which country is leading the Internet of Things economy? The PC revolution, which started, I guess, in the late 1970s and sort of went through the 80s and 90s, the United States of America was the leading exporter of high technology during the age of the personal computer. But the Internet of Things era really started somewhere around 2000, 2002. And at about the same time, China went from being a fairly typical high-tech exporter to being a bigger high-tech exporter than Korea, and then a bigger high-tech exporter than Germany, and then a bigger high-tech exporter than the United States, and the world's leading high-tech exporter. And that speech by Wang Jibao, by the way, really helped accelerate things in the last few years. It's a symbol of a recognition by China of the importance of the Internet of Things age. Meanwhile, the United States starts to slip. No United States president, to my knowledge, has ever used the words Internet of Things in public. Germany takes number 2, and then Korea is coming up pretty fast to take the number 3 spot from the United States. So this country leads the Internet of Things economy by a very long way. And just to finish, I'll show you a few examples. A lot of excitement right now. By the way, this is a great example of digital photography, because that picture must be like about 2 minutes old, that picture of me over there. You couldn't have done that 10 years ago. Self-driving cars are a major early application of the Internet of Things. This is a networked sensor platform on wheels that can act autonomously. Uses a bunch of different sensors. Which country is leading the world in self-driving car technology? Well, interestingly, it's a combination of China and Germany, number 1 and number 2. So, the BMW Connected Drive, a lot of the car technology is from Germany, but the connected Internet of Things self-driving technology is actually from China. It's from a Chinese company you may have heard of. They're called Tencent, funnily enough. Not a lot of people know that. You're thinking WeChat, right? Well, guess what? There's other stuff going on. Some of it not announced yet, but Tencent are working with Foxconn and are one of the leading companies in autonomous car technology. This is a bus from a Chinese company called Yutong. It's a self-driving bus. It's already passed a bunch of tests on roads in China. It's just an example. So what's the value of all this? We take the self-driving bus, for example. You can make buses cheaper because you don't have to have drivers. You make cars safer because you don't have to have drivers. Human beings are terrible drivers. Terrible drivers. 3,000 people die every day because human beings can't drive. And they're not very fuel-efficient drivers, and they're not very land-efficient drivers. And that's just an example of the real benefit of the Internet of Things economy. If you think about what the word economy means, it's what outputs can you get from what inputs? What raw materials do you need, including land and labor, to get something produced? That's basically economy or economics. And what the Internet of Things is doing is enabling us to do more with less. So the trend for the 21st century, because of the Internet of Things, will be more outputs from fewer inputs. We'll be using the same amount of staff, the same amount of labor as we were at the beginning of the 21st century, but we'll be getting a lot more out of it at the end of the 21st century. And by the way, that is most important here, where you have this huge population, all of them expecting better and better standards of living every year. Which takes us back to the beginning. I talked about self-driving cars. The largest fleet of self-driving vehicles in the world is in Western Australia. This is a Japanese truck by a company called Komatsu. It's about 8 meters high, and it's used to strip mine something called bauxite. Now, the bauxite contains some waste product called red mud, which is nasty, and aluminum. And the aluminum gets turned into, most frequently, soda cans. Next time you have a can of soda, keep in mind the aluminum in the can was probably strip mined by a self-driving vehicle, part of the Internet of Things in Western Australia. Why? Because nobody wants to live in Western Australia where the bauxite is. So it's an example of less input, less labor, more output, and it's something that touches each of us every single day. It's a pleasure to be here. If you want to know more, you can reach me on Twitter, which is also where you'll find your photograph of yourself.